Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft and the world in between. Now you might say, didn't he say last week that there is no video this week? And yes, I said that last week, so I'm pre-recording this video on Friday the 29th of April because tomorrow on Saturday I have some reasons not to record the video. Now, why did I do that? Well, first of all, I had the time this Friday to pre-record it. And second, this week there was one session that I will reference later by Golden Roden. And there he made a shout out for this show, which I really was happy about that he mentioned that. And I really appreciated that. So thanks a ton for that. And he said, yeah, that's coming up every Saturday with news from the IT ecosystem, focusing on SAP and Microsoft. And I thought, yeah, except for this Saturday. So I was struggling and thought, hey, I have to do it because this shout out was so nice. I highly appreciate it. And I want to stick to that. And that's why I recorded this video. It's pre-recorded. So there is one thing that I will not be able to highlight for you. I will mention that in a second. When passing the topic, but all the other news are, I think, valuable and up to date. And with that, let's start with the SAP side of the house. First things first, there is a little blog post or a little article by Rui Nogueira about the the BTP Setup Automator, which is an open source tool in order to set up services on BTP. And this is now also part of the SAP Discovery Center, at least of one mission within the SAP Discovery Center, with respect to setting up the central inbox with the SAP Task Center. And this really makes your life easier. Hopefully, that will be also picked up by other missions. So take a look at that one. Take a look at the BTP Setup Automator, because that is, from my perspective, really a cool tool that helps you overcome some glitches, edges on the BTP, and helps you with setting things up. With that, I want to highlight also again the 2 minutes of cloud native videos that are published by the SAP developer advocates. They are coming out now at a regular basis. They are pushed out now on a regular basis, focusing up to now on very generic information around cloud native. So focusing, of course, on Kubernetes containers and so on. And there is one new one this week that came out this week about container image registries. But it will now go, I think, more into depth than also of schema and something like that. Highly appreciated. Quite cool and short, concise videos about that topic. So definitely worth watching. With that, let's switch to the Microsoft side of the house, starting, of course, with Serverless. First blog post that I would like to highlight about Serverless is by Bill Belida, and it's about building an event streaming app with Azure Functions, Event Hubs, and Azure Cosmos DB. And the blog post is quite extensive. Of course, first talks about what's the setup, what's the use case, so what will we build, and then it will really create the infrastructure using Bicep. So all the components that are used, and that also includes the role assignments, are written down using Bicep. So that's really cool. And then, of course, also the creation of the business logic via the Azure Functions. It's .NET based, so it's C# code. But I think that's, again, another very common use case with Azure Functions. And it's great to see also the setup being delivered as infrastructure as code. Then one second news from the pure serverless side. You probably know Azure Functions University, which delivers content around learning Azure Functions. And Mark Duke now decided also to use discussions in order to interact with people using Azure Functions University, with people learning from Azure Functions University. I have referenced the discussion area within the show notes. It's a little quiet still there, but I would highly recommend and say, hey, go to that area and interact with Mark, with all the folks who are supporting the Azure Functions University. Give your feedback, give your ideas, put in your wishes, your questions. That's really a great place to be. And I also highly appreciate that Mark uses discussions within GitHub, because that way you do not have to jump to a completely different another, I don't know, Discord channel, Slack, whatsoever. So that's really, I think, great. With that, let's switch to the container side, and to make it not too steep, let's start with the serverless containers, so to say, with the Azure Container Apps. There are some news that came out this week. First of all, the AZ CLI now has a container app up and deploy command. And this will allow you to deploy your Azure Container App from a local source or from GitHub. And it will make your life easy with respect to the defaults when it comes to Azure Container Registry, when it comes to Log Analytics Workspace, when it comes to the environment and so on. So it will make some educated guesses on how those things should get set up, so you do not have to care about that. Nevertheless, you can influence how things are set up. You can customize the command. And that's, I think, really cool and makes your life easier, especially when you think about the idea of Azure Container Apps. And there is also one new feature that came out this week about authentication and authorization within Azure Container Apps, which are still in preview. Don't forget that. So you can now use some built-in authentications with several providers, like, of course, Azure Active Directory, what a surprise, Facebook, GitHub, Google, Twitter, and any OpenID Connect provider. So from my perspective, that's kind of comparable to what's available within the static web apps. So again, another topic that makes your life very, very easy when you use Azure Container Apps. Now switching to more the non-serverless container part. One great blog post that I would like to highlight by Thorsten Hans on how to lint Docker images, making use of a tool called Dockle. Now, why would you want to lint Docker images? Well, that's the answer that is given in the first section, because you want to enforce security best practices, you want to minimize attack surfaces by hardening your containers, and you want to establish best practices and prevent, let's say, anti-patterns within your container image, so your Docker file. And Dockle can help you with that. And this blog post guides you through how you can install it and how you can use it. So I think that's really super valuable. And then another blog post, also more about the basics, that is, I think, really helpful and a big source of misunderstanding when it comes to Kubernetes. And it's about Kubernetes CPU requests. So the thing that your deployment reserves and Kubernetes guarantees, demystified. So usually when you think, or when you look at dashboards or UIs around Kubernetes, what you will probably see is the current usage of the resources within the Kubernetes cluster. So basically a kubectl top node. This blog post gives you quite some insights on the CPU requesting that is also taking place, and that is at least as important as the current resource consumption. So really, really cool thing. Then also something that I really like when it comes to learning Kubernetes, or in general learning, there is a little comic provided by Google around smooth sailing with Kubernetes that guides you through well, let's say Kubernetes as a whole, gives you a rough overview in the style of a comic strip. Really, I think that is a cool way to provide knowledge, and I really like it, and it's really nicely drawn, so quite cool. And then another news from CNCF and Istio. So this week, Istio has applied to become a project within CNCF. So they pulled in the pull requests to apply for that, and now the process within CNCF starts, and decision will then be taken if Istio becomes a member. That was quite surprising. I think Istio was one of the service mesh providers that wanted to make their own foundation, if I'm not completely mistaken, but maybe I'm mixing up something there. And now, well, I think the move is just right to go to the CNCF, which is kind of the de facto governance standard when it comes to cloud native computing. Now, having said that, there was also a bit of trouble this week around CNCF, not specifically about the governance of projects, but there is the CNCF and KubeCon happening in Spain. And there was quite some trouble this week because CNCF brought out the announcement that there will not be any face masks allowed within the conference area, if I got it correctly. And I have referenced some tweets around that, just if you stumble across that, because I think the discussion will go on. And this discussion also came to the point where several CNCF ambassadors stepped back. So they were CNCF's ambassadors, and they said, okay, please put me on the alumni list. The original tweet that was kind of the trigger for that was removed, and there is now one tweet of the CNCF area that highlights that. So the mask mandate is now still up again, or is up again, I have to say. But there is quite some things going on. Now, why do I highlight that? Not because I want to bash CNCF, but I want to highlight that after 2 years of pandemic, I think you have to be a bit more careful with saying, hey, get rid of your masks, because there are quite some people who are not comfortable when going to such a large conference with thousands of people and not wearing a mask after 2 years of pandemic. And we are still there. So the rates of COVID positives are still high. There is less testing and so on. I don't want to go into down that rabbit hole, but please be a bit more empathic on both sides with respect to that topic, because people are afraid, and I can absolutely rely on that. Now, let's get back to technology and to easier topics. And let's switch to the area of DevOps and GitHub. Last week, I referenced GitOps with one general introduction and one video that was about Fluxity as one option to implement GitOps from a technical perspective. And here is another blog post that I would like to highlight about deploying microservices with GitOps that is now focusing on Fluxity. Not on Fluxity, on Argo CD. Fluxity last week, Argo CD this week. It guides you through about what are microservices, what are challenges, and then tells you how to implement GitOps making use of Argo CD. It's more an overview, so it's not going too deep into technology, but I think that's kind of complementing what was there last week. And then one video that came out this week in the series called Schooled In by Johnny Gibbs about, technical topics, giving an overview. And this week is really interesting. It was about AKS Bicep Accelerator with Kevin Evans. There is also a link within the announcement blog post that also contains the YouTube video to the GitHub repository on the called AKS Construction and or AKS Bicep Accelerator. And this one is really cool because if you're starting with AKS, you probably want to have a setup that, especially in the enterprise area, has or follows security guidelines, is compliant with the well-architected framework, with the cloud adoption framework, so with CUF, and is kind of enterprise grade. And this repository gives you the tools at hand and the Bicep templates at hand in order to achieve that. So if you're starting with AKS, especially in the enterprise area, please take a look at this repository. Then from the GitHub area, quite some news there. Git.io, so the Git.io URL, so the link shortener and redirector service was deprecated, and it should go away effective on Friday, April the 29th, so today. And that was announced quite some time ago, so that was announced in January. Now, there are quite some papers also in the scientific area that rely on that service. So GitHub decided to have a read-only Git.io URL redirection service. That there are some, let's say, limitations with respect to the service, but that makes life easier with some print documentation and research papers that use that service. They will continue the evaluation if it's really necessary to use it with each and every URL that is shown. So the amount that is covered with respect to URLs that are redirected will be getting less and less. But good news is that some papers are still safe. Then GitHub Desktop 3.0 came out and brings you better integration for your pull request. I have referenced the announcement blog post that guides you what is getting better and what improvements have been done with respect to pull requests. Then for the OS developers out there, there is now a public beta for the Mac OS 12 GitHub hosted runner. So for all of you who do OS development, they need that runner in order to build with Swift, and Mac OS 12 is out now. So I think, so at least in a beta phase. So you can use that. Then one news that I think I have referenced last week or the week before about secret scanning. So within organizations that are using GitHub Advanced Security, you can now prevent secrets that are leaked within your code in web commits. So I think it was, the last announcement was that from the command line, you could now no longer commit that if you have the advanced security feature switched on. And now that's also not possible anymore from the GitHub web editor. So also there for repositories with push protection, GitHub will block those pushes where those tokens are detected. You can overcome that. So there is a way to bypass that. But I think that's really super helpful and will improve security of a lot of repositories. Then a very short update on the new GitHub issues features that came out. So one thing, a very small thing, but quite useful, is how to create and delete fields from issues. So your custom fields, you could do that from the table view already. Now you can also do that from the settings page. And then another one that I think is quite interesting to see, that's about the charting that is available, and you can now group by custom fields, which I think gives a bit of the idea where things are heading to. So I think you will have more and more improvements in that area with respect to charting, and that will improve the usability of this feature within GitHub. Then another blog post from the security area about best practices to keep your project secure, especially with respect to dependencies. So this blog post guides you through what to think about dependencies, that you have to understand your dependencies, and how to make then your code more secure in understanding these dependencies. Quite useful with respect to the software supply chain. And then one more from the area of GitHub and the engineering. That's more an introduction blog post, a 101 blog post about friendly forks. So what are friendly forks? When do you use them? How do you use them? What variants are out there with respect to upstream contributions and so on. Quite interesting to read from my perspective, especially if you're starting with GitHub. Then from the broader area of Microsoft, there is a blog post series called Getting Rid of Credentials in Azure there are already 2 parts out there, and there's now a 3rd part talking about easy auth and managed identities. That's why I highlighted it in my show notes, because I think that's kind of the hot topic when you're working on Azure. You will have to let's say, refactor all your stuff in order to use managed identities, because that's the way to go. And then another blog post around the topic of Azure Service Bus and sagas. So if you want to have, if you have an event-driven setup with several messages happening, and let's say you have payments, you have an order and you have payments for that order, and you have a shipping, and the order is fulfilled if the payment went through and the item was shipped successfully. Now, if you do that in an event-driven way, you have this loose coupling, which is good. But if now one of those events fails, how do you compensate the stuff? How do you do that? And that's where sagas come into play. And this blog post guides you through on how to implement sagas with the Azure Service Bus. And then one video from Golo Rodin again. That came out this week and is kind of a successor of the videos that talk about why the native web chooses or broadens their portfolio with Go as a language. And within the last video, Golo mentioned that they want to avoid an even deeper lock-in than they have already with their TypeScript setup to the Microsoft ecosystem. And this video now elaborates what's behind that. So why does Golo and also the members of the company see it as a valid reasoning? And the video is, as usual, super objective. So there is no bashing or something like that. And a very valid reasoning why they want to, be not super dependent on Microsoft, or want to get a bit away of that as far as they can. And very interesting, very valid points from my perspective within the video, definitely worth watching. And now I'm at the point where you will see now this is pre-recorded on Friday, so I cannot yet reference the world in between SAP and Microsoft, namely the weekly SAP on Azure podcasts by Holger Bruchelt and colleagues. So please check that out when you see that this video is out. The SAP on Azure video podcast for this week should also be available. I will reference it in the GitHub show notes as soon as it's out. But yeah, due to the pre-recording, that's the price that I have to pay. And with that, let's switch to learning and events. So 2 more videos by Golo Rodin. So again, the 3 times mentioning, first of all, and that's the reason why you see this video today, the live stream this week, migration on Node.js 18. That was really short. So the migration kind of went through quite quickly, which was an upgrade of Node and a new install of the NPM packages. And that was it. And then the remaining hours, Golo and David went through their Music Maker project that they implemented in TypeScript using the builder pattern this time, or applying the builder pattern or a variant of it, I would say. Super interesting to see. Quite nice video, and there the shout out happened. And then another video about HTTP status codes and why all or most of us are using them wrong. Again, if you are doing API development, if you are using HTTP status codes, watch this video. Definitely worth it, definitely something to learn. And yes, I also used them the wrong way at some points. Then one video by Eberhard Wolf on events, event sourcing, and CQRS. Also worth watching, talking about the basics, event storming, DDD, where do these things come from, and then going into the area of the technical implementation with CQRS. So definitely something to watch. And another video from the Azure Friday series by Scott Henselman about architecting multi-tenant solutions on Azure. So that's something that's really a hard topic from my perspective. And this is something where any guidance is appreciated. So when you architect multi-tenant solutions on no matter what cloud platform, you are happy if you have some guidelines. And this video, first of all, guides you through what's available, and of course has then all the references on the Azure documentation on things that help you with that task. And then upcoming events. First thing from the Azure Rosenheim meetup, it's a virtual event, so you can join from anywhere about several topics. Azure Managed Grafana, so the service that I referenced last week by a blog post that I've highlighted, and the Terraform support from Azure with the AZ API Terraform provider and the Azure Terrafy feature. So that's definitely something that you should sign up. I think it's always great content by Nico and his co-hosts, so definitely worth watching. And Microsoft Build, I think Reserve the Date was something that I mentioned a few weeks ago, and now you can register for Microsoft Build. Registration is open, so you can sign up now. And then kind of a result of the clash around CNCF that I mentioned, or not CNCF, about the KubeCon and CNCF, there is now a request or a call for interest, an evaluation of interest for a community-driven conference called Cube Huddle. And you can sign up for updates and say, well, what would I be? Would I be an attendee, a speaker, a sponsor? And register your interest. I've also referenced the blog post, the tweet by David Flanagan on this topic. So it's not yet a conference that is happening, but maybe something that is community driven, which might be interesting. Then let's move on to developer experience and developer productivity. First of all, Oh My Posh. Oh My Posh is now also installable for those who are using Windows via Winget. I don't know how long that is the case, but I think that's now the preferred way on how to install Oh My Posh via Winget. Then, if you're working with JSON, and who doesn't work with JSON in these days, there is a tool, maybe you know it already, I came across it this week. It's called JSON Visio, and that allows you to visualize your JSON files into interactive graphs, showing you the connection of all the different entities that are within your JSON file. And then, last but not least, this week, well, quite some stuff happened also in the social media area. Namely, Elon Musk made his offer for Twitter, and that was not well received by a lot of people. And the Mastodon, which is kind of another social media thingy like Twitter, got quite some some shout out, first of all, and also quite some folks moved to Mastodon. And there is a really cool blog post that's not new, but it was updated this week, surprise, surprise, by Kat Marchand, I hope I pronounce it correctly, about a quick start for Twitter users who want to move over to Mastodon. And I've referenced it because I think that's something that might also be of interest for you. Why do I reference that? Because I think the sign up and the way Mastodon is organized is completely different to Twitter, of course. And you have to get used to that one. So if you want to get started, I think that might be quite helpful. With that, I'm at the end of today's session. I hope I had some interesting news for you. Hope you see some things to catch up to learn. And with that, I wish you a very nice Saturday, a great Sunday, and a very successful next week. See you again next Saturday, which will then be a real Saturday video. Until then,